Good evening. As you listen to the sound of my voice, you might begin to notice your breath deepening, slowing. Allow me to be your gentle guide tonight, effortlessly leading you through the peaceful landscapes of a time long past. A time when the nights were darker, the winters were colder, and the rules of romance were, well, a little strange. There is nothing to understand, nothing to solve. Just the soft, unfolding story of a custom that feels both impossibly distant and curiously human. And as you begin to settle, just one gentle thought. If this space feels like a comfort to you, you might consider a soft tap on the like or subscribe button. But only if that thought feels as effortless as a quiet breath. And if you feel like sharing, you could even leave a quiet comment, telling me what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. It's always nice to know where these stories land. But for now, that's all. Alright, let the shadows in your room grow long and soft. Maybe you can hear the faint sound of your own breathing. And together, let's allow the story to begin. The wind outside sounds like a hungry animal. It's a low, persistent howl that pushes against the thick wooden walls of your small house, searching for any crack, any gap in the daubing, to sneak its icy fingers inside. But here in the main room, you are safe. You are warm. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke from the great stone hearth that takes up most of one wall. It smells of stew and drying herbs in the faint, clean scent of lye soap. This fire is the center of your world. Its flickering orange light dances across the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling and casts steep, soft shadows in the corners where the day's tools have been neatly put away. You're sitting on a low stool. Your back to the heat, mending it there in a linen shirt. The needle is small in your fingers, and you work by the combined light of the fire and a single tallow candle that sputters on the table, releasing a soft, waxy smell. Across the room, your father sits in his favorite chair, a heavy book of scripture open on his lap, though his eyes have been closed for some time. Your mother is nearby, her hands moving rhythmically as she cards wool, the soft scrape, 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 scrape of the brushes, a familiar and comforting part of the evening's music. It is a scene of perfect, hard-won tranquility. The day's chores are done. The animals are secure in the barn. The world has been shrunk down to this single, warm, glowing space. And then comes a sound that doesn't belong. A sharp, solid knock on the front door. It's not a timid tap. It's the confident rap of someone who has been walking for a long time in the bitter cold and knows they have reached their destination. Your mother's hands pause. Your father's eyes open. You look up from your sewing, the needle frozen mid-stitch. Visitors after dark, in this kind of weather, are almost unheard of. The journey between homesteads is long and in the snow can be treacherous. Your father rises slowly, his joints stiff. He places his book carefully on the chair and walks to the door. As he lifts the heavy iron latch, a blast of frigid air whirls into the room, making the candle flamed unswildly unsending a chill across your skin. Standing on the threshold is a young man. You know him. His name is John, and his family's farm is a good 2 hours walk away on a fine day. Tonight, it must have felt like a journey to the edge of the world. He is torn broad-shouldered, but he seems smaller now, hunched against the cold. A dusting of fine snow covers the shoulders of his thick woolen coat and clings to his hat. His face is red from the wind, and when he speaks, his breath comes out as a perfect white puff. "Good evening, sir," he says, his voice a little rough. He nods to your father, then his eyes find yours for just a moment across the room. A flicker of something shyness, determination, passes through them before he looks back to your father. "John," your father says, his voice a low rumble. He steps back, coming out of that wind. You look half frozen. John steps inside, bringing the sharp, clean smell of winter with him. He removes his hat, running a hand through his damp hair. Your mother takes his thick coat, her expression a mixture of concern and curiosity, and hangs it on a peg near the fire where it immediately begins to steam. You watch as he moves towards the hearth, holding his raw, chapped hands out to the flames. He shivers a deep, uncontrollable tremor that runs through his whole body. Traveling so far after dark was a serious endeavor. Historians still quietly debate the line between what was considered a normal necessity for rural life and what was seen as socially forward. A trip like this, at this hour, walked a very fine line indeed. For a few long moments nobody speaks. The only sounds are the crackling fire, the howling wind, and the quiet hiss of melting snow dripping from John's boots onto the hot stones of the hearth. He is here for a reason. And in a house with few spare rooms and even fewer spare beds, you have a feeling you know exactly what that reason is. The fire spits and hisses a counterpoint to the deep silence that has stopped shivering now, the intense heat of the hearth having chased the deep chill from his bones. He stands straighter, but he keeps his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, as if the answer to an unspoken question lies within them. You've resumed your sewing, or at least you've tried to. Your fingers feel clumsy, and you find yourself staring at the same small section of linen, the needle poised but unmoving. The focus in the room has become so intense it feels like a physical presence. It is your father who finally breaks the spell. His voice is calm, measured, the voice he uses when assessing the quality of a horse or the prospects of the season's crop. That's a hard walk on a night like this, he says, not as a question but as a statement of fact. The north pasture is likely drifted over your head. It is so, John agrees, turning his gaze from the fire to meet your father's. The journey took longer than he'd planned. There's another pause. This is a delicate dance, a conversation with unspoken layers. He didn't walk for hours through a blizzard just to report on the weather. Everyone in this room knows it. You know it. Your heart has begun a slow, heavy thumping against your ribs, a drumbeat marking time in the quiet room. You watch as John swallows, his throat moving. This is it. HES gathering his courage. He has passed the first, unspoken test. He is hardy enough to make the journey. Now comes the second. And he requires a different kind of fortitude. Sir, he begins, and his voice is steadier than you expect. He addresses your father directly, his posture respectful, his hands clasped behind his back. He does not look at you. I've not come only to warm myself. I've come courting. The word hangs in the air, plain and honest. Courting. It's a formal decoration. You feel a wave of heat wash over your face, a blush so fierce you're certain it must be visible even in the flickering firelight. You bend your head lower over your mending, hoping your hair will shadow your cheeks. Your father says nothing. He simply watches John, his expression unreadable. Your mother has set her cards down in her lap, her hands resting on them, still and waiting. And John continues, pressing on into the silence. Given the distance, and the storm that seems to have no intention of stopping, I came to ask for your permission. I was hoping I might be allowed to stay the night. Here it comes. The real question. It's not about a simple bed for a weary traveler. This is something else entirely. Travelers were, of course, often given a spot to sleep, usually a straw pallet on the floor by the fire, the warmest place in the house. But John isn't just any traveler. He just said he was courting. His request is loaded with meaning. He clears his throat, a small, nervous sound. I was hoping, with your blessing, sir, to bundle. The word lands with a soft thud in the quiet room. Bundle. It's not a shocking word, not a forbidden one. It is a known, if sometimes debated custom. Yet, hearing it spoken so plainly in your own home, directed at your own father, about you, it sends a jolt through you. This isn't a story you've heard from a neighbor or a joke whispered between friends. This is happening to you. The request is, in its own way, a masterclass in social etiquette for the time. Some historians suggest that the term itself, bundling, was a softer, more homespun word for a practice that clergy and urbanites might call something far less charitable. It was a folk term, carrying with it an understanding of community standards and trust. John isn't asking to sleep with you in the modern sense. He is asking to participate in a highly structured courtship ritual, under your father's roof and, by extension, your father's authority. Out of the corner of your eye, you see your father slowly stroke his beard, his gaze never leaving the young man who stands before him. He is weighing the request. More than that, he is weighing the man. Is he of good character? Is his family respectable? Is his intention honorable? Is he strong enough to work a farm? And is he serious enough to build a life? All of this is contained in the silence that stretches between them, as if to underscore the gravity of the decision being made within these warm walls. The fate of your evening, and perhaps much more than that, hangs on your father's next words. The space between the question and its answer feels vast enough to walk across. The fire crackles, devouring another piece of seasoned oak. The sound is an Avingum loud in the tense quiet. Your father continues his slow, deliberate stroking of his beard. He is not a man who makes hasty decisions. You know this. You have seen him stand for an hour in the fields, simply observing the sky before dusk. He is applying that same patient gravity now. To your surprise and to John's visible relief, a slow nod is his first response. The boy's family is good stock, your father says, speaking to your mother, but loudly enough for everyone to hear. They have the best drained northern pasture in this whole territory. His father is an honest man at market. It's not a compliment about John. It's a validation of his lineage, his background. In this world, the character of a family is like currency. It speaks to a person's upbringing, their work ethic, their place in the community. You let out a breath you didn't realize you were holding. This is a good sign. John's request has been dismissed out of hand. Your mother, who has been silent until now, finally speaks. Her voice is softer than your father's, but it carries its own kind of authority. He looks like a decent young man. He walked all this way in the snow. That shows a certain earnestness. Earnestness. That's the word for it. There's nothing frivolous about this. This isn't a whim. This is a calculated, deliberate act of courtship. He is demonstrating his seriousness of purpose, his physical stamina, and his willingness to adhere to the local customs, however strange they might seem to outsiders. Your father turns his gaze back to John, who has been standing as still as a statue this whole time. The rules are known to you, I assume. Yes, sir, John says immediately. Fully understood. His voice is firm, and that's it. There's no further negotiation. No list of stipulations read aloud. The rules are the rules, ancient and unspoken, passed down through generations. They are part of the fabric of this life, as understood as the need to salt meat for the winter or to bring the animals in during a storm. The trust is implicit. By asking, John is agreeing to the terms. By consenting, your father is placing his faith not just in John, but in the tradition itself. Very well, your father says with a final, decisive nod. You may stay. A wave of something washes over you. It's not quite relief, not quite excitement. It's a dizzying mix of apprehension and anticipation. Your evening has just taken a very sharp and unexpected turn. The quiet rhythm of mending and listening to the fire has been shattered. The rest of your night will be different. Your mother rises from her stool. The decision made, the household now shifts into a new mode of practical preparation. Daughter, she says, and her voice is all business. Go and make yourself ready. You nod, your throat suddenly too dry to speak. You place your sewing carefully into a small basket, your hands moving with a precision you don't feel. You stand and curtsy, a small, automatic gesture of respect to your parents, and then turn towards the narrow, steep staircase that leads to the sleeping loft above. Your legs feel unsteady, as if you're walking on the deck of a ship. This is the moment where the abstract idea of bundling becomes a concrete reality. Historians often debate the level of parental enthusiasm for this practice. Was it a reluctant concession to the practicalities of a cold climate and a shortage of housing? Or was it, as some social historians argue, an actively endorsed method of courtship, allowing young people a rare chance for private conversation in a world with almost no privacy? For your parents, tonight, it seems to be the latter. They see it as a legitimate and proper step in the long road towards marriage. A chance to talk, to gauge compatibility, to connect on a level that shouted conversations at a noisy church picnic could never allow. As you place your foot on the first creaking stair, you can hear your father behind you, his voice once again a low rumble. The night is long, he says to John, and the floorboards are thin. It's not a threat. It's not a threat. It's a simple reminder. A statement of architectural fact that carries all the weight of a chaperone. The supervision isn't just in the rules, It's built into the very structure of the house. You are all in this together, separated only by a few inches of wood. You climb the stairs, each tread groaning under your weight, moving from the warm glow of the fire into the deep, cool darkness of the loft. The night ahead of you is no longer a simple stretch of sleep. It is now an event, an occasion, a strange, formal, and deeply personal interview, conducted in whispers in the dark. The sleeping loft is cold. The warmth from the great hearth below doesn't quite reach this high, and the air up here is still and sharp. A single small window, little more than a shuttered slit in the wall, is sealed tight against the storm, but you can feel a faint, persistent draft coming from it. This is your space. By day, it's where you and your mother spin and weave. By night, it's where the family sleeps. Your small rope bed is in one corner, your parents' larger one in another. The darkness is thick, broken only by the faint orange glow seeping up through the gaps in the floorboards from the fire below. Make yourself ready, your mother had said. It's a simple instruction, but tonight it feels loaded with a new and unfamiliar significance. Normally, preparing for bed is a straightforward affair. You'd remove your heavy outer dress and apron, perhaps your shoes, and sleep in your chemise, a simple, long linen shift. It is the basic undergarment of your life. But tonight is not a normal night. The goal is not comfort or ease of sleep. The goal is insulation. You move to the large wooden chest at the foot of your bed where your clothes are stored. You lift the heavy lid, the scent of dried lavender and cedar wood rising to meet you. You are not taking clothes off. You are putting more on. You start with your legs. Over your thick woolen stockings, you pull on another pair. 2 layers of wool. It feels bulky and awkward. Then you turn your attention to your torso. You're already wearing your chemise and a sturdy set of stays, the stiffened bodice that gives your body its proper shape. You don't remove them. Instead, you pull a waistcoat on over them, the kind you might wear for extra warmth while working in the barn. It's made of heavy, felted wool. You pull on not one but 2 petticoats. They are heavy, made of scratchy flannel that your mother wove last winter. The sheer volume of fabric makes you feel slow and cumbersome, like a bear preparing for hibernation. This layering is one of the most curious and often misunderstood aspects of the bundling ritual. It was just about staying warm in a cold room. It was a practical, physical manifestation of the moral boundaries being enforced. Some accounts, though they are often anecdotal and hard to verify, describe specialized bundling clothes. There are tales of chemises sewn shut down the middle, or petticoats that were more like sacks, with drawstrings to tie them closed around the ankles. Historians are still trying to sort out which of these accounts are factual and which are exaggerated embellishments, likely told with a wink and a nudge by later generations who found the whole custom bizarre. But even without specialized garments, the principle is clear. You are wrapping yourself in layers of defense. The clothing becomes a form of armor. It is a tangible commitment to the rules, a signal to him, to your parents downstairs, and perhaps most importantly, to yourself, that the line will be held. Finally, you put on your cap, a simple cotton coif that covers your hair, and tie it firmly under your chin. You look down at yourself. In the dim light, you must look like a shapeless mound of fabric. You feel entirely unromantic. And maybe that's the point. This isn't about allure. It's about endurance. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You hear the faint sounds of movement from below. John is preparing too. You wonder what his process is. Does he keep his heavy breeches on? His waistcoat? You imagine him also layered and uncomfortable, standing by the fire, just as nervous as you are. You turn down the covers of your bed. The mattress is stuffed with corn husks and straw, and it rustles loudly as you smooth the heavy woolen blankets and the thick quilt. The bed is small, barely wide enough for one person to sleep in comfortably. The idea of sharing it, even with a barrier, seems physically improbable. You sit on the edge of the mattress, the ropes of the bed frame groaning in protest under the weight of you and all your layers. You are ready, or as ready as you can be. You are a fortress of fabric, a walking, breathing testament to propriety. You fold your hands in your lap and wait, listening to the wind outside and the slow, steady beat of your own heart. The night is young, the house is quiet, and the most unusual date of your life is about to begin. The silence from downstairs stretches on for a few more minutes. You can hear the low murmur of your parents' voices, then the heavy scrape of a bench being moved. They are preparing the room for the night. Then you hear the slow, heavy tread of footsteps on the staircase. It's a man's walk, your father. He appears at the top of the stairs, his large frame silhouetted against the firelight from below. He is not empty-handed. In his arms, he carries a long, wide, and remarkably thick plank of wood. You've seen it before, of course. It usually leans against the wall in the barn, where it serves as a makeshift shelf for tools or sacks of grain. It's a simple, utilitarian object, hewn from a single piece of solid oak, weathered and scarred from years of use. It's heavy, practical, and utterly devoid of romance, and tonight, it is the guest of honor. Your father carries it into the loft and, with a soft grunt of effort, lays it lengthwise down the exact center of your small bed. It lands with a solid, definitive thump on the rustling mattress. The board is so wide it takes up a significant portion of the bed, leaving a narrow channel of space on either side. It's less of a divider and more of a separate piece of furniture that just happens to be resting on your bed. You adjust it, nudging it a few inches this way and that, making sure it's perfectly centered. He is as careful and precise as if he were set in a fence post. This act is the physical manifestation of his trust and his authority. He is setting the boundary, a clear, uncrossable, 3-inch thick oak boundary. This board is the most famous element of the whole tradition, the part that has captured the imagination of storytellers and historians for centuries. And yet, its use was not universal. Many historians argue that the bundling board was more of a symbolic prop, or perhaps only used by the most cautious of parents. Some sources suggest that in many cases, there was no board at all. Instead, a bundling bolster, a long firm pillow, might be used, or simply a ridge created by a tightly tucked blanket. And in some households, the only thing separating the couple was the sheer force of their own willpower and the mountain of clothing they wore. The debate continues to this day: was the board the standard, or was it the exception? A kind of tongue-in-cheek, over-the-top enforcement of a rule everyone already understood. Tonight, in your house, it is very much the standard. Your father steps back and surveys his work with a critical eye. He seems satisfied. He looks at you sitting on the edge of the bed, a small mountain of petticoats and wool. There, he says. His expression is serious, but you think you see a flicker of something else in his eyes: amusement, memory. Perhaps he bundled with your mother once, long ago. Then he turns and descends the stairs, his footsteps fading away. A moment later, a second set of footsteps begins to climb. He appears at the top of the stairs, his own form now framed by the glow from below. He has taken off his wet boots and his heavy outer coat, but he is still fully dressed in his shirt, waistcoat, and breeches. He looks from the formidable board dominating the bed to you, perched on the edge, and a look of profound awkwardness crosses his face. He holds a small, flickering candle which casts shifting, nervous shadows on the angled rafters of the ceiling. The small flame illuminates the tension in the air. "Good evening," he says, his voice barely a whisper. "Good evening," you whisper back. He walks slowly toward the bed as if approaching a wild animal. He places his candle carefully on the small trunk at the foot of the bed, adding its small pool of light to the room. He looks at the narrow space allotted to him on the far side of the oak partition. There is no easy way to do this. The bundling board sits between you, a silent, wooden chaperone. It is a promise and a prohibition all in one. It promises a space for conversation, for closeness, for sharing warmth against the bitter cold. But it prohibits anything more. It is the physical manifestation of the phrase, "thus far and no farther." The entire success of the evening, the very honor of the tradition, rests on respecting this simple, heavy piece of wood. The time has come to actually get into bed. There is a long, profoundly awkward pause. You are both standing on opposite sides of the bed, looking at this ridiculous, narrow space allotted to you. The bed, already small, has been bisected by the thick plank of oak, turning it into two separate, cramped trenches. The logic of the situation is clear, but the mechanics are baffling. How does one gracefully get into a bed that is already occupied by a large piece of lumber? John clears his throat. I believe this is my side, he says, gesturing to the far side of the board, the side closer to the cold outer wall. It's a gentlemanly concession, giving you the slightly warmer, more secure side closer to the center of the house. Yes, you murmur, your gaze fixed on the quilt. He takes a deep breath and begins the delicate process. It's not a simple matter of pulling back the covers and slipping in. He has to perch on the very edge of the rope-strung frame, swing his legs up and over, and then carefully lower himself into the narrow channel without upsetting the entire precarious arrangement. He moves with a slow, deliberate caution, his movements stiff and constrained by his layers of clothing. The bed groans and sways under his weight, as if your own movement might capsize the whole enterprise. Finally he is in. He lies flat on his back, his hands folded on his chest, staring straight up at the dark, sloping ceiling. He looks like a knight laid out on a tomb, still fully dressed for battle. He has left the blankets on his side neatly folded, not yet daring to pull them over himself. Now it is your turn. You feel a blush creeping up your neck for what feels like the 100th time tonight. You perform the same awkward maneuver, sitting on the edge, lifting your legs, a task made difficult by the sheer volume of your petticoats, and sliding into your designated sliver of the bed. You too lie flat on your back, your own hands clasped over your stomach. The reality of the situation is both more and less intimate than you had imagined. You are acutely aware of his presence, just inches away. You can hear the soft sound of his breathing. You can feel the slight dip his weight makes in the mattress, even with the board between you. The faint, clean scent of the cold night air still clings to his clothes. It is an intimacy of proximity, of shared space in the deep quiet of the night. And yet you feel utterly separate. The bundling board is a formidable presence. Its hard, unyielding edge presses against your side through your blankets and many layers. It is a constant physical reminder of the rules. It's a wall, plain and simple. You both lie there for what feels like an eternity, to statues in it a blow of formalized courtship. The silence is broken only by the wind, the distant crackle of the embers downstairs, and the rustle of the straw mattress whenever one of you makes the slightest adjustment. The scene is, frankly, absurd. This is a point that later satirists and critics of bundling would seize upon with glee. They would write poems and draw cartoons mocking this very moment to young people. Lying side by side in the dark, separated by a piece of wood, engaged in the most passionate version of romance imaginable. But for you in this moment, it isn't funny, it's just strange. Slowly, carefully, you each reach for your respective edges of the heavy quilt and pull it up to your chins. Now you are to parallel ridges under a single blanket, with the mountain range of the bundling board running between you. The candlelight flickers, casting long shadows that make the small loft feel vast and mysterious. The initial excruciating awkwardness begins to subside, replaced by a kind of settled reality. This is it. This is bundling. It is not an embrace. It is a shared vigil. The cold of the room presses in, and you're grateful for the heavy wool of the blanket and the many layers you're wearing. The practicality of the custom suddenly makes a new kind of sense. Without this shared warmth, sleeping in this loft would be a miserably cold experience, but warmth is only part of it. The real purpose of this elaborate ritual is about to begin. The physical arrangement is just the stage setting. The main event has yet to start. You lie in the quiet, waiting, wondering who will be the first to speak. The candle on the trunk gutters, its flame shrinking to a tiny, looting nub before finally extinguishing itself with a soft hiss. The room is plunged into a profound darkness, the kind that only exists far from city lights on a moonless, stormy night. The only light now is the very faint, ghostly orange that filters up through the cracks in the floorboards. It's not enough to see by, but it's enough to remind you that you are not entirely alone. The darkness changes the feeling in the room. The visual awkwardness is gone, replaced by a heightened awareness of sound. You can hear the steady, rhythmic thump-thump of your own heart. You are sure he can hear it too. For another long minute, the silence holds, and then, from the other side of the oak board, his voice comes, low and soft, barely more than a whisper. Are you comfortable? It's a simple, polite question, but it breaks the tension like a stone dropped into a still pond. Yes, you whisper back, your own voice sounding breathy and unfamiliar in the dark. Are you? As much as can be expected, he says, and you can hear the hint of a smile in his voice. A small spark of humor or shared absurdity. It makes you relax just a little. And so it begins, not with a grand declaration of love or a passionate plea, but with quiet, tentative questions. He asks about your day. You ask about his journey. You talk about the ferocity of the storm, the health of the livestock, the price of corn at the last market. It's small talk, the kind of conversation you might have with any neighbor. But here, in the dark, whispered across a plank of wood, every word feels magnified, weighted with significance. This was the true, intended heart of bundling. In a world where young, unmarried people were rarely, if ever, left alone, this was their one chance for a private, extended conversation. During the day, all interactions were public, supervised, and noisy. A shared moment at a church social, a stilted conversation over the dinner table with the entire family listening, a shouted greeting across a field, none of it allowed for real connection. There was no space to truly learn about the person you might one day marry. Here, in the cocoon of the darkened loft, the outside world falls away. There are no parents listening to every word, no younger siblings running underfoot. There is only the two of you in the long, quiet hours of the night. The conversation deepens. He tells you about his father's plan to clear a new field come spring, the challenges of it, the hope he has for a better yield. He speaks of his ambitions, not in a boasting way but with a quiet earnestness. You, in turn, find yourself talking about things you rarely speak of. You tell him about the intricate pattern you're hoping to weave into a new blanket, a design you saw once and have kept in your mind's eye. You talk about a book you borrowed and read, and you're surprised and pleased when he tells you he has read it too. You discover you share a similar sense of humor, a dry wit that finds the same small things in life funny. You learn that he is quieter and more thoughtful than his confident demeanor in public might suggest. He learns that you are more than just the dutiful, quiet daughter he sees on Sundays. You have opinions. You have ideas. You have a whole inner world he has never been privy to. This is the strange magic of the bundling board. By enforcing a strict physical separation, it paradoxically creates a space for a deeper kind of intimacy. There is no pressure for physical affection, no expectation of a kiss or an embrace. All that energy is channeled into words, into the simple act of listening and being heard. Historians who defend the practice against its more salacious reputation often point to this. They argue that bundling at its best was a remarkably progressive form of courtship. It prioritized conversation and intellectual and emotional compatibility over mere physical attraction. In an age of arranged marriages and purely practical unions, it offered a chance for something more, a meeting of mind. The hours slip by measured not by a clock, but by the slow drift of your conversation. You talk until your voices are hoarse from whispering. You share silences that are no longer awkward, but comfortable and companionable. The hard, cold plank of wood between you seems to matter less and less. You are building a different kind of bridge, one made of shared stories and quiet understanding. The wind still howls outside, but in this small, dark space, you have created a pocket of warmth and connection that has nothing to do with the fire downstairs and everything to do with the person breathing softly on the other side of the board. Just as the conversation finds a comfortable, flowing rhythm, a sudden, loud creak from the floorboards below shatters the quiet intimacy of the loft. It's the unmistakable sound of your father shifting his weight on his own rope bed. It is followed by a deep, throaty cough. You both fall instantly silent. The spell is broken. The illusion of privacy, of being in your own little world, evaporates in an instant. You are reminded, with startling clarity, that you are not alone. Your parents are right there, just a few feet beneath you, separated by nothing more than a layer of wooden determination. John clears his throat, a small, nervous sound in the renewed silence. You lie perfectly still, straining your ears listening. Is your father awake? Was that cough a deliberate signal, a gentle reminder of his presence? Or was it just the random noise of a sleeping household? It's impossible to know for sure, and that is precisely the point. The ambiguity is in itself a form of supervision. This architectural reality was a key component of social control in most early colonial homes. Privacy, as we understand it today, was a luxury that simply did not exist. Houses were small, often consisting of one or two main rooms. Families lived, worked, and slept in close quarters. The sounds of life, a crying baby, a snoring parent, a whispered conversation, were part of the shared domestic soundscape. Historians who study the architecture of the period often talk about the permeability of these homes. Walls were thin, doors were few, and sound traveled easily. This lack of privacy wasn't seen as a defect, it was simply the way of things, and it had a profound effect on behavior. When you know you can be overheard at any moment, you choose your words and your actions with greater care. The bundling tradition was perfectly adapted to this environment. It was a semi-private act conducted within a public space. Your parents' consent was not just a one-time permission granted at the door. It was an ongoing passive supervision that lasted the entire night. They didn't need to stand in the room with a candle. The house itself was the chaperone. The creaking floorboards, the thin walls, the shared breathing space of the home, they all served to enforce the rules. You lie in the dark, every muscle tense. You imagine your father down there, lying awake, listening. Is he picturing the scene upstairs? The board, the separate spaces, the whispers. Is he satisfied that the tradition is being honored, or is he worried? The silence from below continues. Slowly, minute by minute, the tension in your own body begins to ease. Perhaps it was just a cough. Perhaps he is sound asleep. After what feels like a very long time, John speaks again, but his whisper is even softer now, more cautious. The easy flow of the conversation has been disrupted. The awareness of being monitored has changed the dynamic. The conversation becomes more careful, more deliberate. The shared jokes and easy laughter are replaced by a more sober exchange. You talk about your respective churches, about the sermon last Sunday. It's a safe, respectable topic. You discuss the challenges of the coming winter, the need to repair a section of fence before the deepest snows arrive. These are practical, earthy subjects, grounded in the realities of your shared world. The brief flight into more personal, abstract thoughts has been gently grounded by that single, creaking floorboard. This is the delicate balance of bundling. It offers a taste of freedom, a rare opportunity for connection, but always within the firm, unyielding container of family and community oversight. It's a paradox. The most private conversation you've ever had is, in a way, one of the most public. You realize that this entire experience is a test, not just of his character, but of yours as well. Can you both navigate this strange, contradictory space? Can you build a connection while still respecting the rigid boundaries, both physical and invisible? Can you whisper your secrets, knowing that the rustle of your movement, whoa, that is just a little too loud, might be heard and interpreted by the silent audience below? The entire ritual is a training ground for a life that will be lived largely in the open, under the watchful eyes of family and neighbors. Your ability to honor the rules of this one night speaks to your ability to honor the larger rules of the society you live in. As the conversation continues in its more muted, cautious tone, your mind begins to wander to the practicalities of it all. Why this strange, elaborate ritual? Why not just have him sleep on a mat by the fire like any other guest? The answer, you know, is woven into the very fabric of your life, into the size of your house and the realities of a world built on subsistence. You look around the darkened loft, at the familiar shapes of the spinning wheel and the loom in the corner. This small upper floor is the only bedroom in the house. There is your bed, and there is your parents' bed. Downstairs, the main room serves as kitchen, living room, and workshop. There is no guest chamber with a neatly made bed waiting for a visitor. This simple fact, a profound shortage of space and beds, is what many historians believe to be the primary origin of bundling. It wasn't born from a desire for romantic innovation, but from sheer, unadorned necessity. In the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly in rural and frontier areas, houses were small and families were often large. A proper bed, with a rope-strung frame and a flock or feather mattress, was a valuable piece of furniture, a significant family asset. There simply weren't enough of them to go around. So when a visitor came, you had to get creative. Sharing a bed was common practice, not just for courting couples, but for travelers, relatives, and even strangers. The hearth was the warmest place in the house, but sleeping on the hard floor, even on a straw pallet, was a cold and uncomfortable affair, especially in the depths of a New England winter. Offering a spot in a real bed was an act of genuine hospitality. And when the visitor was a young man courting a daughter of the house, who had traveled a great distance and couldn't possibly make the return journey in the dark, a unique problem arose. It was inhospitable to make him sleep on the floor or in the barn where he might freeze. It was unthinkable to give him his own bed, as none existed, and it was improper to send him away. The solution was a compromise. He could share the warmth of a bed, but under the strictest possible conditions. Bundling was, in essence, a clever social hack, a way to reconcile the demands of hospitality and the constraints of poverty with the imperatives of morality. You think of John's long walk. If this custom didn't exist, what would his options have been? He would have had to make his visit during the daylight hours, arriving after morning chores and leaving long before sunset. The entire interaction would have been a few brief, public hours. The journey itself would have consumed more time than the visit. Courtship over such distances would have been almost impossible, a thing of stolen moments and shouted pleasantries. The custom, born of scarcity, created an opportunity. It transformed the practical problem of where does the visitor sleep into a formal stage of the courtship process. This practical origin story is, for many historians, the most compelling explanation for bundling. They argue that any romantic or psychological benefits were secondary, if welcome, consequence. However, there's a competing school of thought. Some scholars believe that while necessity was a factor, it doesn't tell the whole story. They suggest that the practice had deeper roots and that was less anxious about shared sleeping spaces than our modern one. They argue that pre-industrial people had different concepts of privacy and personal space, and that bundling was a natural extension of a more communal way of life. This debate over practical necessity versus cultural mindset is one of those quiet arguments that keeps the field of social history interesting. Lying there in the dark, you don't see it as an academic debate. You see it as the simple truth of your life. The house is small because there is only so much time and wood to build a larger one. Beds are few because they are labor-intensive and expensive to make. The winter is cold because that is the way of the world. And John is here in your bed, separated by a board, because it is the most sensible solution to a dozen different problems at once. It is a tradition forged in the crucible of a harsh and demanding reality, a testament to human ingenuity in the face of limitation. The conversation shifts again, drifting away from the immediate concerns of your own small world. John, his voice a low whisper in the darkness, begins to speak of a letter he received some weeks ago. It was from his cousin, who lives not in the colonies, but back in the old country, in a small village in the Netherlands. He writes that his own courtship is progressing. John murmurs. He told me that he spent a night at his intended's home. He called it Q.S.den. The word is foreign and strange to your ears, but the description that follows is strikingly familiar. His cousin spoke of being invited to stay the night, of sharing a bed with his sweetheart, fully clothed, with her parents sleeping in the same room. He spoke of long hours of whispered conversation in the dark. It was bundling, just by another name. This is a startling piece of information. You had always thought of this custom as your own, a peculiar habit of these new colonies, born from the unique hardships of this new world. To learn that it is practiced across the vast ocean in the ancient, settled villages of Europe is a revelation. John goes on to say that his cousin mentioned the practice as common not just in the Netherlands, but in parts of Wales and Switzerland as well. In Wales, Hed heard it called Kuyngwli, which meant, quite simply, loving in the bed. It seems this strange nocturnal courtship was not a colonial invention at all, but a transplanted folk tradition, a piece of cultural luggage carried across the Atlantic by the first settlers. This is a key point that historians love to emphasize. Bundling wasn't an American anomaly. It was part of a broader tapestry of pre-industrial European folkways. In societies where young people's labor was essential to the family economy, and where there were few public spaces for unsupervised socializing, communities across the North Atlantic developed similar solutions. These customs provided a way for young people to form attachments under the watchful eyes of their families, in a way that didn't disrupt the demanding rhythms of agricultural life. The discovery that you are part of a much older, wider tradition is strangely comforting. It makes the practice feel less bizarre and more substantial. It has history. It has roots. You are not just engaging in a quirky local habit, you are participating in an ancient ritual, a rite of passage shared by countless young people in thatched roof cottages and remote farmhouses for generations. However, the exact origins and connections between these various European and American practices are a point of ongoing scholarly fascination and debate. Did the New England Puritans bring it directly from England? Or was it more influenced by Dutch settlers in New York and New Jersey? Some historians trace a direct line, pointing to specific regions in England where similar customs were documented. Others argue for a case of convergent evolution, that different societies, faced with similar social and economic conditions, cold climates, small houses, and need for courtship, independently developed similar solutions. It's a puzzle of cultural transmission where the pieces are scattered across continents and centuries. As John speaks, you picture it, a young Welsh farmer, a Dutch fisherman, a Swiss goatherd, all lying in the dark, whispering to a potential partner, perhaps with a board, or a bolster, or just a mountain of homespun cloth between them. The thought connects you to a vast, invisible community of bundle RS stretching across space and time. The knowledge changes your perspective on the night. This isn't just about you and John anymore. It's not even just about your family and your small community. You are part of a story that is much bigger than you are. The wind howling outside your small New England farmhouse is the same wind that sweeps across the dikes of Holland and the mountains of Wales. And the quiet, hopeful, and slightly terrified whispers you are sharing in the dark are echoes of whispers that have been uttered different languages in 100 different villages for centuries. The bundling board between you feels less like a strange piece of furniture and more like an artifact, a link to a shared, secret history. The first faint, pearly grey light of dawn begins to seep through the shuttered window, signaling that the long night is nearing its end. The conversation has dwindled into a comfortable silence. The air in the loft is still and very cold. Soon, the house will stir, the chores will begin, and this strange, suspended moment in time will be over. You find yourself thinking about what will happen next. When John leaves, when the story of his overnight stay inevitably spreads through the small community, what will people say? Will there be whispers, judgment? And then you realize, with a sense of calm certainty, that there won't be. Not really. In your world, this is not a scandal. It is the opposite of a scandal. It is a public declaration of honorable intent. For John to have come to your father, to have asked for permission so formally, was an act of profound respect. For your father to have granted it was an act of trust, not just in John, but in the integrity of the custom itself. The whole event, from the moment of his knock on the door, has been conducted within the bounds of community-sanctioned propriety. By participating in bundling, you are not flouting social norms, you are actively upholding them. This is a crucial aspect of the custom that is often lost on modern observers who tend to see it through the lens of their own, very different moral community. Bundling was, for a time, seen as a perfectly respectable, even virtuous, part of the courtship process. It was a sign that a relationship was serious. It was an announcement to the world that a couple was formally courting, a recognized step on the path to marriage. The community's acceptance was, in a way, a form of collective chaperoning. The knowledge that everyone knew you had bundled served as its own kind of restraint. If the courtship did not end in marriage, if a child was conceived, there was no hiding it. The responsibility was clear. The custom, therefore, had a built-in mechanism for accountability. It was a high-stakes, high-visibility act. To engage in it was to put your own reputation, and that of your family, on the line. Some historians have argued that bundling actually served as a way to prevent premarital shenanigans. By providing a sanctioned outlet for intimacy and conversation, it may have reduced the temptation for couples to seek out more dangerous, completely unsupervised trysts in barns or fields. It brought the courtship process out of the shadows and into the semi-public space of the family home. It was a way of managing the undeniable attraction between young people in a controlled, observable environment. Of course, this rosy view is not the whole picture. The respectability of bundling was a fiercely debated topic, even at the time. But in many small, tight-knit agricultural communities, particularly in the earlier colonial period, it was defended as a practical and honorable tradition. It was seen as a test of character. A young man who could spend a night with his intended and behave with perfect propriety was a man of discipline and strong moral fiber, exactly the kind of man you would want for a son-in-law. A young woman who did the same demonstrated her own virtue and modesty. You think of your neighbors, the Putnams and the Courtiers. If they hear that John bundled with you, they will not gasp in shock. They will nod. They will nod. They will say, "Ah, so he is serious about her." They will watch the two of you at the next church service with a new interest, looking for signs of a deepening attachment. The act of bundling has legitimized the courtship. It has moved it from the realm of private affection into the sphere of public recognition. The plank of wood between you, which seemed so strange and awkward just hours ago, now feels like a shield. It is a symbol of your family's and your community's trust. It is the physical proof that this night was conducted with honor. As the grey light strengthens, you feel a sense of security in that. You have passed the test. And in the eyes of the world that matters to you, you have done nothing wrong. In fact, you have done everything right. The quiet satisfaction you feel is, not universally shared. You can already hear in your mind's ear the thundering voice of the Reverend Miller. Just last month, he had dedicated an entire Sunday sermon to the sins of the flesh, his gaze sweeping over the congregation, seeming to linger on the younger faces. He had spoken of the devil's opportunities and the slippery slope of temptation. He never used the word bundling explicitly. He didn't have to. Everyone knew what he was talking about. He was part of a growing chorus of influential voices, particularly from the clergy and the more urban, sophisticated echelons of society, who were beginning to condemn the old folkways. These were men of the Great Awakening, a religious revival that was sweeping through the colonies. They were preachers of a more fiery, more emotionally charged, and in many ways, more rigid brand of faith. To them, traditions like bundling were not harmless customs born of necessity. They were relics of a looser, less godly time. They were dangerous invitations to sin. Lying there in the cold morning light, you can picture the scene, the plain, unadorned meeting house. The hard wooden pews, the congregation rapt as the Reverend's voice rises in righteous indignation. He would paint a vivid picture of the wantonsons and licenses that such practices encouraged. He would argue that to willingly place two young, unmarried people in the same bed, board or no board, was to mock God's law and test providence in the most arrogant fashion. These preachers saw the bundling board not as a shield, but as a flimsy, pathetic joke. A piece of wood, they would thunder, could not possibly restrain the powerful, corrupting forces of human nature. They argued that the custom relied on a naive and foolish trust in the willpower of young people, a willpower that was, in their view, fundamentally weak and prone to failure. This clerical opposition is one of the best documented aspects of bundling's history. We had surviving sermons, pamphlets, and church records that rail against it. For these religious leaders, the issue was black and white. There was no room for cultural nuance or practical considerations. The practice created an occasion of sin, and that was all that mattered. They campaigned actively to stamp it out, pressuring their congregations, shaming families who permitted it, and threatening participants with public censure or even excommunication. The debate over bundling thus became a flashpoint in a larger cultural battle. It was the old, raw, pragmatic folk traditions versus the new zealous and uncompromising religious fervor. It was the community's trust in its own customs versus the minister's demand for a stricter, more universal moral code. Historians are still untangling the complex effects of this opposition. Did the sermons work? In some places, yes. In more cosmopolitan areas like Boston or Philadelphia, under the constant fire of clerical condemnation, bundling began to decline earlier. It became associated with the uneducated, country folk, and was seen as a source of embarrassment for those who aspired to a more refined social standing. But in other, more remote rural areas, the tradition proved remarkably stubborn. Families pushed back, quietly insisting on their right to follow the ways of their ancestors, and viewing the minister's prohibitions as an unwelcome intrusion into domestic affairs. Some might argue about whether the preachers weren't really concerned with morality, or if it was more about asserting their own authority over the flock. You think about the Reverend Miller and his fiery words. Do you feel shame? A sense of sinfulness? Lying here after a night of chaste conversation and quiet connection, his accusations feel hollow and unfair. He speaks of a temptation you haven't felt, a licentiousness that was never present. His sermon describes a different night entirely, a lurid fantasy that has nothing to do with the respectful, awkward, and surprisingly innocent reality you have just experienced. You realize that your father, by consenting to this, was taking a stand. He was choosing the old ways, the ways of his own father, over the new, strident morality of the pulpit. He was placing his faith in his daughter, in a visiting suitor, and in a piece of oak, rather than in the dire warnings of a man of the cloth. The coming Sunday service might be a little uncomfortable. You will feel the weight of the reverend's gaze, but you will not feel like a sinner. You will feel like a daughter who has obeyed her father and honored a tradition that, for all its strangeness, felt right and true in the quiet darkness of the long winter night. The grey light in the loft has strengthened, and you can now make out the fine, swirling patterns of frost on the inside of the small window. The house below is beginning to stir. You hear the scrape of the hearth being cleared, the clank of an iron pot. The day is beginning. John, on his side of the board, shifts slightly. The straw mattress rustles. "It is morning," he whispers, a statement of the obvious that carries the weight of a farewell. "Yes," you reply, your own voice a little rough from sleep that never quite came. In these final moments, you reflect on the night, not as a social custom or a religious debate, but as a personal experience. And what you realize with a sudden clarity is that the entire ordeal has been an incredibly effective, if unconventional, character test. Every moment, from his arrival to this quiet dawn, has been a measure of the man lying just inches away from you. His decision to walk for hours through a blizzard demonstrated his physical fortitude and the seriousness of his intent. You know he is not frivolous. A man who is not serious does not endure that kind of cold. His formal request to your father showed respect for authority and tradition. He did not try to sneak or cajole his way into your company. He faced your father directly and stated his purpose, adhering to the proper protocol. You know he is not deceitful. His behavior throughout the night has been the most telling test of all. He was a perfect gentleman. He took the colder side of the bed. He was respectful in his conversation, never inappropriate. He honored the symbolic and physical presence of the bundling board without question or complaint. He whispered when the house was silent and fell quiet when the floorboards creaked. You know he is a man of discipline and self-control. This, many social historians argue, was the hidden genius of bundling. It was a live-action, high-stakes audition for the role of husband. In a society where a woman's well-being and future were almost entirely dependent on the character of the man she married, there could be no more important assessment. A man's charm at a church social or his strength in the field were one thing, but his behavior during a long, dark, unchaperoned yet fully supervised night was something else entirely. It revealed his true nature. Could he be trusted? Did he respect boundaries? Was he patient? Was he honorable even when he thought no one was watching, or rather when he knew he was being trusted not to cross a line? The bundling ritual provided answers to these questions in a way no other form of courtship could. And it was a test for you too. Your willingness to participate, your own adherence to the rules, your modest and sober conduct. It all reflected on your character as a virtuous and suitable future wife. You both passed. The debate among historians often centers on how consciously this testing aspect was understood at the time, Was it an explicit, recognized function of the ritual? Or was it an implicit, subconscious benefit? Some argue that parents were quite deliberate in using bundling as a vetting tool. A father might say, "Let's see what metal this young man is made of." Others suggest it was more organic, that the character-revealing nature of the experience was simply a natural outcome of the tradition's structure, not its stated purpose. It remains an intriguing question of intent versus function. John carefully, quietly, begins to extricate himself from the bed. He performs the same awkward, reverse maneuver as the night before, swinging his legs out and planting his feet on the cold wooden floor. He stands and stretches, his joints popping softly in the quiet room. He looks at you, still cocooned in your blankets. In the clear morning light, you can see his face properly. He looks tired, but his expression is one of genuine warmth and respect. There is a new understanding in his eyes. He has seen a side of you that no one else has, and you have seen a side of him. "Thank you," he says, his voice a normal volume now, no longer a whisper, "for the hospitality." It's a formal, polite phrase, but it feels filled with all the unspoken conversation of the night. He is not just thanking you for a space and a bed. He is thanking you for the trust, the conversation, the shared experience. The test is over, and it seems to the quiet satisfaction of both of you that you have found each other to be of good character indeed. As John makes his way downstairs to break his fast with your family before his long walk home, you lie in bed for a few moments more, listening to the familiar morning sounds of your household. The night is over, the bard will soon be returned to the barn, and life will resume its normal course, but something has shifted. A thought occurs to you, a whispered story you once heard from an older cousin. She had spoken of her own courtship, a mischievous twinkle in her eye. "In our house," she had said, "my father trusted our characters. We bundled without the board." The idea is both scandalous and intriguing, bundling without the board. Was that a common practice? Or was it a rare exception, a sign of extreme parental confidence or perhaps negligence? This variation on the tradition is a fascinating and tricky subject for historians. The bundling board is the most iconic image of the custom, the thing everyone remembers. But the historical evidence suggests it was far from universal. Many accounts of bundling, especially from the individuals who actually experienced it, make no mention of a physical plank of wood at all. Instead, they describe other methods of separation. A bundling bolster, a long, tightly stuffed pillow, was a common substitute. It created a ridge down the middle of the bed, a softer, but still clear. In other cases, the separation was created entirely with the bedding itself. A skilled mother could tuck the blankets and quilts in such a way as to create a formidable barrier, a center ridge that was surprisingly difficult to cross without causing a major disturbance of the covers. And then there were the most liberal or trusting households, where the only thing separating the couple was their layers of clothing and the invisible, but powerful, lines of honor and social expectation. In these cases, the board was purely metaphorical. It was an understood boundary, a shared commitment to propriety that needed no physical reinforcement. The decision of whether to use a board, a bolster, or nothing at all likely came down to a variety of factors. The family's own strictness, their level of trust in their daughter, their assessment of the suitor's character, and local variations in the custom all played a role. It's also possible that the board was a more common feature in the early stages of a courtship, a kind of training wheels for bundling. As a couple proved their trustworthiness over several visits, the board might be dispensed with, a sign of graduating to a new level of confidence. This is, of course, a subject of lively academic debate. How can we know for sure how common each variation was? The sources are often anecdotal and colored by the passage of time. People's memories of their own courtships might soften the details, or perhaps they were reluctant to admit to the more rigid aspects of the practice. Some scholars suggest the boardless bundling was more common than we think, and that the board itself became an exaggerated symbol, a caricature of the custom that was more popular in jokes and songs than in actual bedrooms. Others maintain that the board was a crucial and widespread element, and that bundling without it was a risky and rare deviation from the norm. You imagine the scene your cousin described, the same shared bed, the same whispered conversation, but without the hard, unyielding presence of the oak plank. The space between them would have been softer, the boundary more fluid. It would have required an even greater degree of self-control, a more profound level of mutual trust. Lying in your own bed, you press your hand against the space where the board had been. You can still feel its phantom impression on the mattress. You think about John, and the quiet respect he showed all night. You wonder if he were to come calling again, if he were to prove his good character over and over, would your father one day decide that the board was no longer necessary? The thought sends a small, thrilling shiver through you. It's a possibility that hangs in the air, a future stage of this strange courtship, a deeper level of trust yet to be earned. The journey of bundling, it seems, might have more than one step. Downstairs, you can hear the murmur of conversation around the breakfast table. John's voice, your father's low rumble. Soon he will depart. As you finally push back the heavy quilts and begin to dress for the day, another, more scandalous thought surfaces, a dark undercurrent to the respectable tradition. You just a tit of hushed gossip at quilting bees and dry jokes among the men at the grist mill, the bundling babies. The question is as obvious as it is delicate. Did this custom, designed to uphold virtue, sometimes fail? The answer, of course, is yes. Despite the boards, the bolsters, the layers of clothing, and the fear of God, human nature is a persistent force. The bundling bed, for all its safeguards, was a place of powerful temptation. And inevitably, sometimes, that temptation won. The result was a not insignificant number of pregnancies that began not after a wedding, but during a courtship. This is the great, undeniable contradiction at the heart of bundling, and it's what gave its critics, like the Reverend Miller, so much ammunition. They could point to the local church records, to the list of baptisms, and do some simple math. They could see the babies born a mere 7 or 8 months after a wedding ceremony and draw their own conclusions. In some New England towns, church records from the 18th century show that a surprisingly high percentage of brides were already pregnant on their wedding day. The term bundling babies might be a modern invention, but the phenomenon was very real and well known at the time. It was the custom's most significant and visible failure, the risk that every parent took when they allowed a suitor to stay the night. The historical debate around this topic is intense. Just how widespread was this outcome? Some historians, particularly those critical of the custom, argue that bundling was a primary driver of the era's high rates of premarital pregnancy. They portray it as a deeply flawed and naive system that was almost designed to fail, a thin veneer of propriety over a core of sexual license. They suggest that the bundling board was often a joke, easily tossed aside once the parents were asleep. However, other historians offer a more nuanced view. They argue that while these pregnancies certainly happened, it's a mistake to blame bundling exclusively. Young people have always found ways to be alone, with or without a formal custom. A tryst in a hayloft or a secluded meadow was just as likely, if not more so, to result in a pregnancy. They also point out that in many of these cases, the pregnancy simply accelerated a marriage that was already planned. And if a child was conceived between a betrothed couple, the community's response was often not one of scandal, but of pressure to move up the wedding date. The couple was expected to marry, and quickly, to legitimize the child. You think of Sarah, a girl from a neighboring farm who was married last spring. Her belly was already round and full beneath her wedding dress. There were whispers, of course. People counted the months on their fingers. But she and her husband were a good match. Their families approved, and once the baby was born and baptized, the gossip mostly faded. The community had a way of absorbing these slips, of weaving them back into the social fabric, as long as the proper forms, chiefly marriage, were ultimately observed. Still, the risk was profound, especially for the young woman. The consequences of a pregnancy without a subsequent marriage would have been devastating, leading to social ostracism and a life of hardship. You look at your reflection in the small, wavy piece of glass that serves as a mirror. You feel a new appreciation for the weight of your father's decision, and for John's honorable conduct. The night was a high wire act, performed over a chasm of potential ruin. The bundling board was the safety net, however flimsy it might have seemed to an outsider. The reality of the bundling babies adds a layer of shadow and risk to the quaint, homespun image of the tradition. It reminds you that this was not a game. It was a serious business with the highest possible stakes, a delicate negotiation between custom, desire, and consequence, played out in the quiet darkness of 1,000 winter nights. A few days have passed since John's visit. The snow from the storm has settled, and a fragile winter sun casts a pale, watery light over the landscape. The memory of the night, the whispers, the darkness, the solid presence of the board, feels both intensely vivid and dreamlike. Life has returned to its familiar, demanding rhythm. You are in the main room with your mother, performing one of the week's most monotonous and muscular chores, churning butter. The steady, rhythmic thump-slosh of the dasher in the tall wooden churn is a sound you have known your entire life. It's a mindless task, which makes it the perfect time for conversation. The bundling board is back in its usual place, leaning against the far wall of the barn. You saw it there this morning when you went to milk the cow. Seeing it in the light of day, covered in a light dusting of hay chaff, it looked so ordinary. It was hard to believe it had been the silent, central character in such a strange, insignificant drama. "Mother," you asked, your voice tied to the downstroke of the churn. The bundling board, has it always been used for courting? Your mother doesn't stop her own work, deftly mending a sack with a large curved needle. A small, knowing smile touches her lips. "Gracious no, child," she says without looking up. That board, and the beds themselves, have seen more than their share of travelers, most of them a good deal older and less handsome than your John. You stop churning for a moment. "Travelers. Of course," she says, biting the thread and starting a new stitch. "Where else would they sleep?" She tells you a story from her own childhood, a winter even harsher than this one. A traveling preacher, a stern-faced man with eyes that seemed to look right through you, had been caught in a sudden blizzard miles from the next settlement. He arrived at her family door half frozen, his horse lame. To turn him away would have been a death sentence. Hospitality wasn't just a virtue, it was a sacred duty, a cornerstone of survival in this isolated world. But their house, like yours, had only 2 beds. "So what happened?" you asked, picturing the scene. "My father slept in the bed with the preacher," she says, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "They put the board between them, said their prayers on opposite sides, and went to sleep. It was about sharing the warmth of the mattress, nothing more. A body is a furnace, child. 2 bodies or a small fire, it was about surviving the night." This revelation lands with surprising force. The custom of bed sharing, you realize, was not exclusively about courtship. It was a flexible tool, a practical solution to the recurring problem of lodging in a world without inns or spare rooms. It was a fundamental expression of community and mutual support. A courting couple was just one specific application of a much broader principle. This is a point historians often stress to contextualize the more famous romantic version of bundling. Bed sharing was common among all sorts of people. Soldiers on campaign, apprentices in a workshop, servants in a great house. People of the same sex frequently shared beds for warmth and to save space. What made bundling unique was that it crossed the gender line, but the underlying principle of practicality and necessity was the same. The academic question that arises here is one of language and categorization. Did your ancestors call it bundling when it wasn't for courtship? Some scholars argue that the term bundling was specifically reserved for the romantic ritual. Sharing a bed with a traveler of the same sex or a family member was just sharing a bed. It needed no special name. Others suggest the term was used more broadly to describe any instance of 2 people sharing a bed with a divider, regardless of the context. It's a subtle distinction, but it speaks to how people understood and labeled their own social practices. Your mother continues, telling you of another time when a family, distant cousins, were traveling through and had to stay the night. The husband and wife slept in one bed, and she, as a young girl, shared her own bed with their daughter, a stranger to her. No board was needed then. The shared space was simply a practical arrangement. The knowledge reframes your experience with John. The bed you shared wasn't some special romantic piece of furniture. It was a household resource, like a pot or a bench, to be allocated as necessity dictated. The bundling board was not a prop for romance. It was a tool for maintaining propriety in a variety of socially complex sleeping arrangements. It was a physical boundary marker for when the normal rules of the home had to be bent to accommodate the demands of weather and hospitality. The practice suddenly seems less strange, less focused on the charged emotions of courtship, and more deeply rooted in the sober realities of life. It was a system for managing bodies in a small space, for sharing life-saving warmth, for upholding honor in intimate proximity, whether the person on the other side of the board was a potential husband, a stern preacher, or a distant cousin you'd never met before. You resume your churning, the dash's rhythmic beat a steady companion to your thoughts. John has sent word via a neighbor that he intends to call again next week. If the weather holds, the prospect fills you with a quiet, nervous excitement. The first visit was a success, a passing grade on a difficult test. But what now? What are the rules for a second, or a third, bundling night? You ask your mother. If he comes again, is it the same, or are there other rules? Your mother sets aside her ending and looks at you, her expression serious now. The main rule is always the same: honor, but there are other things, unwritten things, unwritten and proper conduct. And so she begins to lay out the subtle, unwritten etiquette of bundling, the small but crucial details that separate a successful courtship from a failed one. This is the kind of knowledge that is never recorded in books or sermons. It is folk wisdom, passed from mother to daughter, the soft, invisible scaffolding that holds the whole tradition together. First, she says, a young man must not presume. He does not arrive every week. That is too forward. It suggests his mind is not on his work. He must show that he is patient, that his life does not revolve solely around chasing a wife. His visits should be occasional, spaced out, making each one an event. And when he is here, she continues, he must not be lazy. He arrives early enough to help with the evening chores. He shows your father he is not afraid of an axe or a bucket. He earns his place by the fire and in the bed. This is a crucial point. He is not a guest in a tavern to be waited on. He is an apprentice husband, and he must demonstrate his value to the family unit. Then she comes to the night itself. In the loft, she says, her voice dropping a little, the conversation is the heart of it. But it is not endless. A time comes when the talk must cease, and you must both turn to prayer and then to sleep. To talk all through the night, until the rooster crows, is a sign of overexcitement, of a lack of sober discipline. There must be a period of respectable quiet, a shared, silent rest. She also speaks of the morning after. He must not linger. He shares the morning meal, thanks your father and me, and then he is on his way. To hang about is to be a nuisance. He has his own chores to return to, as we have ours. The visit has a clear beginning and a clear end. It is a temporary disruption of the household's routine, and it must not overstay its welcome. This is the kind of granular detail that social historians live for, as it paints a much richer picture of the practice than the simple, sensational image of a couple in a bed. These unwritten rules reveal the deep structure of the custom, showing how it was integrated into the rhythms of daily life and the values of the community. It wasn't a romantic free-for-all. It was a highly structured and ritualized process. The existence of this complex etiquette is one of the strongest arguments against the idea that bundling was simply a crude, pragmatic custom. The level of detail and social nuance suggests it was a sophisticated social institution with its own codes of conduct. Of course, historians must be careful. These rules were likely not uniform. They would have varied from family to family, from village to village. Reconstructing this unwritten code is a major challenge, relying on piecing together clues from diaries, letters, and oral histories. It's a constant debate. Are we uncovering a widely understood set of rules, or are we just seeing the specific habits of one particular family? Your mother's final piece of advice is the most important. And you, daughter, she says, fixing you with a steady gaze. Your role is not passive. You are not a prize to be won. You are his equal in this. If his talk turns improper, if he shows any disrespect for the board between you or for your honor, the night ends. You tell him to go and sleep by the fire. You have that power. Do you understand? The words resonate deep within you. You are not just a participant, you are a guardian of the ritual. The responsibility is shared. The honor of the night rests as much on your shoulders as it does on his. You have the authority to end it. The churn feels lighter in your hands now. The prospect of John's next visit feels less daunting. You are armed with more than just layers of petticoats and a plank of wood. You are armed with knowledge, with the unwritten rules of engagement, and with the quiet, firm authority that your mother has just handed down to you. As John's visits become a semi-regular, if carefully spaced, feature of the winter, the news of your courtship spreads. And with that news comes a different kind of attention humor. The custom of bundling, so serious and fraught with meaning within the walls of your own home, is a rich source of comedy for the outside world. One afternoon, visiting the small general store in the village crossroads, you overhear two men talking by the Cracker Barrel. One of them recites a verse from a popular song, his voice loud and performative. But let them bundle as they will, the board is not between them still. They'll roll and tumble, laugh and play, and get a bedfellow in a 9-month day. They both erupt in loud, knowing laughter. You feel a hot blush creep up your face, and you quickly busy yourself examining a bolt of cloth, pretending you haven't heard. This was the other side of bundling's public face. While it might have been a respectable custom in the eyes of many participants, it was also a massive, unmissable target for satire, jokes, and bawdy folk songs. The inherent absurdity of the situation, the mix of intimacy and prohibition, the famous board, the layers of clothing, was simply too good for the wags and wits of the day to pass up. These jokes and songs circulated widely, appearing in almanacs, cheap printed broad-sized, and passed along orally in taverns and at market days. They were the 18th century equivalent of memes, a shared cultural shorthand that everyone understood. The humor often centered on the perceived failure of the custom. The songs were full of clever couples who found ways to outsmart the parents, toss the board aside, or get up to mischief right under the noses of the sleeping family downstairs. You hear another one, a joke about a young man who, when asked by the girl's father if he behaved himself, replied, "Perfectly, sir. I never once set foot on your daughter's side of the board." The punchline, of course, relies on the idea that he found other ways to cross the barrier without technically stepping over it. This popular culture response to bundling is a treasure trove for historians, but also a tricky source to interpret. Does the existence of these jokes prove that the custom was widely abused and secretly mocked by everyone? Or does it simply show that people have always enjoyed a joke about a slightly taboo subject? This is a constant challenge for historical representation from historical reality. Some historians argue that the humor was a form of social release valve. The custom was so freighted with seriousness and moral anxiety that joking about it was a way to diffuse the tension. By laughing at the failures of bundling, people could simultaneously acknowledge the risks and temptations without having to confront them in a serious way. The jokes were a way of saying, "We all know what could happen," with a wink and a nudge. Others suggest that the proliferation of these jokes, especially in the later 18th and early 19th centuries, was a sign of the custom's decline. As bundling began to be seen as old-fashioned and rustic, urbanites and the more refined classes used this humor to distance themselves from their country cousins. The jokes became a way of marking social boundaries, of saying, "We don't do that sort of thing anymore." Sitting at home that evening, the laughter from the store still ringing in your ears, you feel a strange mix of emotions. Part of you is embarrassed, feeling as though your private, personal experience has been turned into a cheap public joke, but another part of you can't help but see their point. The situation is a little ridiculous. You remember the sheer awkwardness of that first night, the two of you lying like statues on either side of the great oak plank. Perhaps it is something to be laughed at. The existence of the humor doesn't negate the seriousness of your own experience. Both seem to be true at once. Bundling is a solemn, high-stakes ritual of courtship, and it is also a slightly absurd practice that is ripe for parody. The two realities coexist, the private truth and the public joke, a perfect illustration of how complex and contradictory a single human custom can be. The seasons turn. The brutal winter slowly loosens its grip, yielding to the muddy, messy promise of spring. The world outside your small house begins to change. The days grow longer, the sun feels warmer, and the great, roaring fire in the hearth is allowed to dwindle to a bed of embers during the day. And with the changing of the seasons, you begin to notice a subtle shift in the logic of your world. One evening, John arrives for a visit. He doesn't look half frozen this time. His cheeks are flushed from a brisk walk in the cool spring air, not from battling a blizzard. The desperate, life-or-death need for him to stay the night, to share the warmth of a bed lest he perish on the road, suddenly seems less urgent. The initial practical justification for bundling, the harsh, unforgiving cold, is melting away with the snow. He could, if he really needed to, make the journey home after dark now. It would be a long walk, but not a life-threatening one. The fact that he still asks to stay, and that your father still grants permission, shows that the custom has taken on a life of its own, separate from its purely practical origins. It is now a recognized, unexpected stage of your courtship, but the original reason is fading. This is a small, personal reflection of a much larger historical trend. As the 18th century progresses and moves into the 19th, life in the colonies is, for many, becoming less of a desperate struggle for survival. Houses are getting bigger. A new, more prosperous generation is building homes with more than 1 or 2 rooms. The concept of specialized spaces is beginning to take hold. You hear talk of families building new homes with a best room, a formal parlor reserved for guests, or perhaps a separate kitchen built onto the back of the house, which frees up space in the main living area. These architectural changes, which seem so minor, have a profound impact on social customs. A larger house means more beds. More beds mean less need for sharing. A dedicated parlor for entertaining guests means a young man can court a young woman in a room that is separate from the main bustle of the household without having to retreat to a bedroom. Historians see this as a key factor in the decline of bundling. The practice was a product of a specific set of material conditions: small houses, cold winters, and a shortage of beds. As those conditions began to change, the custom's primary justification began to erode. Why engage in such a strange and risky ritual when there were simpler, more respectable alternatives available? The debate among scholars isn't if these changes mattered, but how much they mattered relative to other factors. Was it the warming world of bigger houses and central heating that killed bundling? Or was it the relentless pressure from the clergy and the rise of a new, more privacy-focused morality? The most likely answer is that it was a combination of all these things. The sermons provided the moral argument, and the architectural changes provided the practical means to adopt a new way of doing things. You didn't have to choose between hospitality and propriety anymore. You could have both. One afternoon, your father comes home from the village with a new, exciting idea. He has been talking to a carpenter about adding a small lean-to kitchen onto the house come summer. It would free up the main room, he says, his eyes gleaming with the thought of progress. And we could move the loom in there. Make this space feel bigger. You look around the familiar room, the heart of your home, and try to imagine it. A house with a separate kitchen. A main room just for living. It feels like an unimaginable luxury. You think of John, and of the bundling board. If you had a proper parlor, a room where you could sit and talk with him for hours, supervised but with a measure of privacy, would you still need to bundle? The question hangs in the air, a sign of a world in transition. The foundations of the tradition, the cold, the lack of space, are starting to crumble. And you are standing right on the fault line, living through the slow, almost imperceptible shift from an old world into a new one. The new lean-to kitchen is built over the summer, a modest addition of roughs on timber that nonetheless feels like a palace wing. The great cooking hearth is now in this new space, and the main room of the house feels transformed. It is quieter, cleaner, and seems impossibly spacious. Your mother moves her loom into the corner once occupied by cooking pots and utensils. Your father declares the area around the old hearth, now used for warmth only, to be the sitting area. It is, in essence, a parlor. A room with a single, dedicated purpose, social interaction. This autumn, when John comes to call, the entire ritual of his visit is different. He arrives in the late afternoon, and instead of huddling by the fire for warmth, he is invited to take a seat on the bench in the new sitting area. Your mother serves him a cup of cider. Your father joins them, and they speak of the harvest. It is all very formal, very civilized. Then your father, after a respectable interval, makes an excuse to check on the livestock. Your mother suddenly remembers a task she must attend to in the new kitchen. And just like that, you and John are left alone. You are sitting on stools a few feet apart in the warm glow of the fire. You are not lying down. You are fully visible, yet you have a real measure of privacy. The closed door to the kitchen and the sounds of work from the barn provide a sense of seclusion that is entirely new. You can speak in normal voices, not whispers. You can see each other's expressions clearly in the firelight. This is the rise of the parlor, and it is a revolution in courtship. For the first time, you are having the conversation of bundling without the act of bundling. The core purpose of the old custom, a private, extended dialogue, has been transplanted into a new, and many would argue, more appropriate setting. This shift from the bedroom to the parlor is a major focus for historians of family life and domestic architecture. The parlor became the new stage for courtship. It was a semi-private space controlled by the family, where a young couple could get to know one another under a kind of passive supervision. Parents could be just in the next room, their presence felt but not seen. It was the perfect compromise, offering more privacy than a shared family meal, but more propriety than a shared bed. The parlor sofa, some historians have cheekily argued, became the new bundling board. It was a space with its own set of unwritten rules and boundaries. A couple could sit together, but how close was too close? Was holding hands permissible? A stolen kiss. The parlor created a whole new landscape for the negotiation of intimacy, one that was arguably just as complex as the old one. The academic debate here often revolves around what was gained and what was lost in this transition. What was gained was obvious propriety, comfort, and a move away from a custom that was increasingly seen as scandalous and backward. Courtship was brought out of the darkness of the loft and into the respectable light of the main floor. But was anything lost? Some might argue yes. The bundling bed, for all its awkwardness, created a unique environment of profound intimacy and vulnerability. The shared darkness, whispering, the sheer strangeness of the situation, fostered a kind of connection that a formal parlor conversation could not replicate. The parlor was more performative. You were sitting up, dressed in your day clothes, conscious of posture and appearances. In the bundling bed, stripped of everything but your voices and your thoughts, perhaps a different, deeper kind of truth could be shared. It's a difficult thing to measure, this quality of intimacy, and it remains a point of speculation for those who study the emotional history of the past. As you sit with John, the conversation is easy and pleasant. You speak of your families, of your hopes for the future. It is a lovely evening, yet you find yourself thinking of the winter nights, of the shared silence, of the feeling of his presence, just on the other side of the board. This new way is better, safer, more modern. But a small, secret part of you feels a sense of nostalgia for the strange, intense connection that was forged in the cold, dark loft. And you are changing with it, but you can't help but feel you are leaving something unique and irreplaceable behind. A letter arrives from your aunt, who lives in Boston. It is a rare and exciting event. The letter is full of city news, of new fashions and political chatter. And then you come to a paragraph that makes you stop and read it twice. Your cousin, a young woman about your age, is being courted by a clerk from a shipping office. My aunt writes, with a tone of weary exasperation, he is a persistent caller. He stays so long in the parlor that I am forced to pointedly win the clock and yawn to hint that he should take his leave. She then adds a line that stings, thank goodness we are in a civilized city, and do not have to resort to the rustic methods of courtship I hear are still practiced in the country. I cannot imagine anything more scandalous. Rustic methods, scandalous, she means you. She means your family. She means the custom you have participated in, the custom your father sanctioned. To your aunt, a woman of the city, bundling is not an honorable tradition born of necessity. It is a source of shame, a mark of being backward and unrefined. This letter is a perfect illustration of the growing cultural divide that was sounding the death knell for bundling. As the 19th century approached, the gap between urban and rural life was widening. In cities like Boston, Philadelphia, and New York, a new middle class was emerging. They had bigger houses, more wealth, and a powerful desire to be seen as respectable, modern, and sophisticated. They were adopting new standards of etiquette, many of them imported from Europe, that emphasized privacy, formality, and the separation of the sexes. To this new urban sensibility, bundling was horrifying. It smacked of poverty, of a lack of control, of base animal instincts barely held in check. It was everything they were trying to leave behind. The parlor call, with its strict time limits and formal conversation, became the new gold standard of respectable courtship. Bundling was relegated to the status of a dirty little secret of the country bumpkins. You can feel the judgment radiating from your aunt's words. She is picturing a scene of haste and loose morals, not a carefully managed ritual of honor. This perception gap is fascinating to historians. It shows how a single custom can have two entirely different meanings depending on the observer's social position. To the insider, bundling was a complex system of rules and trusts. To the outsider, it was simply a license for licenses. The academic debate often focuses on the speed and nature of this change in perception. When exactly did the tide turn? Some historians point to the post-revolutionary period as a key turning point. As the new United States sought to establish itself as a respectable nation on the world stage, there was a conscious effort to shed old, primitive folkways and adopt more enlightened European manners. Bundling became a casualty of this national rebranding. Other scholars argue that the criticism was always there, but it grew louder and more influential as cities grew and the printing press spread anti-bundling sermons and satirical articles more widely. The custom didn't suddenly become scandalous, the scandal just got better publicity. You fold the letter, a feeling of defensiveness rising in you. Your aunt, in-house with its multiple rooms and imported furniture, cannot possibly understand your world. She has never had to weigh the life of a traveler against the risk to her daughter's reputation. She has never known a cold so deep that sharing a bed was a matter of survival. Her civilized world is built on a foundation of wealth and infrastructure that you do not have. Her judgment feels unfair, ignorant. And yet, it has power. The words rustic and scandalous linger in your mind. They make you feel, for the first time, a little ashamed. You think of your new parlor. It is a step towards your aunt's world, a step away from the old ways. The letter is more than just family gossip. It is a dispatch from the future. It is a sign that your world, the world of the small farm and the ancient customs, is shrinking. The values of the city, of civilization and refinement, are spreading, casting a long shadow over the traditions you have always known. The bundling board is not just being replaced by a sofa. It is being condemned by a whole new way of thinking about the world. Years pass. The world shifts and changes in ways both large and small. Your courtship with John, which began on that cold winter night, blossomed in the parlor and culminated, as everyone expected, in marriage. You now have a home of your own, not far from your parents' farm. It is a newer house with a proper kitchen and 2 small bedrooms upstairs. You have never needed a bundling board. You are a mother now yourself. Your eldest daughter, Sarah, is 16, with the same quiet eyes and steady hands that you had at her age. And one evening, a young man from a neighboring farm comes to call on her. His name is Thomas, and he is shy and earnest. He sits in your parlor, talking with Sarah about the church choir, and you watch them from the kitchen, a strange sense of time folding in on itself. After several visits, as winter begins to set in, Thomas finds the courage to ask your husband, your John, a question. He wants to know if he might, on a particularly cold night, be permitted to stay. He doesn't use the word bundle. The word itself has become too loaded, too old-fashioned, but the implication is there. He is asking to engage in the old custom. You and John discuss it that night, long after the children are asleep. It is a conversation that feels both foreign and deeply familiar. The world is different now, John says, his voice thoughtful. People don't do that anymore. They would talk. He is right. The community has changed. The old, tight-knit world where everyone understood and trusted the custom has given way to something new. There are more families moving in from other places, people who don't know the old ways. The Reverend Miller's successor is even more vocal in his condemnations. The jokes you once overheard in the general store are no longer told with a familiar wink. They are told with a scornful laugh at the expense of the old-timers. To permit bundling now would not be seen as an act of honorable trust, but as an act of defiant, stubborn backwardness. It would be a true scandal. And so, with a feeling of quiet sadness, you and John make a decision. You will tell Thomas that he is welcome to stay, but he will sleep on a pallet of blankets on the floor of the warm parlor. You will offer him hospitality, but not in the old way. The risk to your daughter's reputation and your family's standing in this changing community is simply too great. You realize, the generation that is ending it. You are the bridge between the old world and the new. You experienced the custom yourself. You understood its logic and its honor. But you cannot, in good conscience, pass it on to your own children. The social context that made it work has vanished. This is how traditions die, not in a sudden cataclysm, but in a series of quiet, individual decisions. A father who says no when his own father would have said yes. A mother who steers her courtship into the parlor instead of the loft. A community that begins to value a reputation for modern respectability over a reputation for old-fashioned trust. Historians who study the decline of bundling see this pattern repeating across New England and the other regions where it was practiced. The custom faded slowly, unevenly, hanging on in the most remote and isolated areas long after it had vanished from the towns and more settled farmlands. The last known accounts of bundling date from the mid-19th century, where it was treated as a strange and curious relic of a bygone era, a story told by grandparents to their disbelieving grandchildren. The academic question is always one of timing and cause. Did the last bundling couple exist in the 1840s or the 1850s? Was the final death blow delivered by the preachers, the architects, or the satirists? The truth is, it had no single killer. It died of 1,000 small cuts, a slow erosion of its social and practical foundations. The next time Thomas visits, you give him your answer. He accepts it with grace, seeming almost relieved. Perhaps the prospect of bundling was as terrifying to him as it was exciting. He sleeps on the parlor floor, and his courtship of your daughter continues along a more modern, more respectable path. That night, as you lie in your uncomfortable bed next to John, you feel a pang of nostalgia. You think of the two of you, young and nervous, whispering in the dark on either side of an oak plank. It was a strange and challenging ritual, but it was yours. It was the beginning of your story, and now you have closed that chapter forever. You have become the last bundling couple in your family's line, the keepers of a memory that your own children will never experience for themselves. Years later, you are a grandmother. Your hair is streaked with silver, and your hands, though still busy, move a little more slowly. Your daughter Sarah is married to Thomas, and they have children of their own. The world is a place of astonishing change. You've heard talk of railroads and telegraphs, inventions that seem like magic, shrinking the vast distances that once defined your life. The old farmhouse of your youth feels like a relic from another century. One day, a young man comes to your door. He is not a suitor. He is a writer, a historian from a university in Boston. He is polite and well-dressed, and he carries a leather-bound notebook and a pen. He says he is traveling through the countryside, collecting stories about the old ways. He has heard that you, and your husband, might be one of the last living links to a forgotten custom. He wants to know about bundling. You and John, now stooped with age but with his eyes still clear, invite the young man into your parlor. You serve him tea in thin porcelain cups that were a wedding gift. He opens his notebook, his pen poised, and he begins to ask you questions. Was it true, he asks, his brow furrowed with academic curiosity, that a board was always placed in the bed? In our case, yes, John says, a fine, solid piece of oak. But my cousin, she bundled without one, you add. Her father was a very trusting man. The young historian scribbles furiously in his notebook. Fascinating. So its usage was inconsistent. He asks about the clothing. He asks about the conversations. He asks, his voice lowered with a delicate hesitation, about the consequences, about the bundling babies. You and John answer as honestly as you can, dredging up memories from a lifetime ago. But as you speak, you realize how difficult it is to convey the truth of it. Your memories are your own. They are colored by your love for each other, by the passage of time, by the stories you have told yourselves over the years. Is your memory of the night's innocence entirely accurate, or has it been polished by decades of happy marriage? This is the fundamental challenge for historians who study customs like bundling. The evidence is shaky. There are the official sources, the church records that hint to premarital pregnancies, the sermons that condemn the practice, the court documents from the rare cases where things went horribly wrong. These sources are valuable, but they are all written by opponents or outside observers. They are records of bundling's failures and its critics, not its everyday reality. Then there is the other kind of evidence, the anecdotal, the personal, the remembered. This comes from diaries, letters, and much later, from interviews like the one you are giving now. These sources provide a glimpse into the lived experience of bundling, but they are also deeply subjective and unreliable. People misremember. They embellish. They tell the historian what they think he wants to hear. They might be ashamed to admit to the less than honorable parts of their own stories. The young historian asks you, and how common was this really, in your youth? Was every couple bundling? You look at John, and he looks at you. How can you possibly answer that? It was common enough, you say slowly, but not for everyone. Some families were stricter. Some boys were not trusted enough to be invited. It depended on the weather, John adds, and the distance the boy had to travel. You can see the historian struggling to turn your nuanced, it depends answers into concrete facts for his book. He is trying to build a solid, definitive account of the custom from the shifting sands of your memory. The academic debate will rage on long after you are gone. Historians will argue for a century or more about bundling. Was it a widespread custom or a rare exception? Was it a virtuous test of character or a pernicious and profane practice? Was the board a real to law a symbolic joke? They will analyze every sermon, every court record, every folk song, every last interview with an old woman like you. And they will never quite agree. The evidence is too thin, too contradictory, too fragile. The young man thanks you for your time. He closes his notebook, a satisfied look on his face. He believes he has captured a piece of the past. But you know that he has only captured a shadow of it, an echo. The fear, the hope, the smell of the tallow candle, the weight of the silence, the solid feel of the oak board is a thing that cannot be written down in a notebook. It exists only in the quiet, shared memory of two old people, sitting in a parlor that has long since replaced the need for such strange and desperate measures. The young historian's visit leaves you feeling reflective. You find yourself tracing the path of your own life, and the life of your family from that long ago night to this present moment. It feels like a journey across a vast and changing landscape. The central movement of that journey, you realize, was from the bundling board to the parlor sofa. This was not just a change in furniture. It was a fundamental shift in the geography of love and courtship. You think of your own experience, the shared bed, the enforced proximity, the whispered confessions in the dark. The entire event was defined by the physical setting. The intimacy was intense, immediate, and fraught with a strange combination of physical closeness and rigid prohibition. The conversation was the main event because there was nothing else to do. Your relationship was built, in those early stages, on a foundation of pure dialogue. Then you think of your daughter Sarah's courtship with Thomas. It took place almost entirely in your parlor. They sat on chairs and later, as they grew more comfortable, on the small, stiff sofa you acquired. Theirs was a courtship of glances, of shared hymn books at church, of carefully chaperoned conversations. The physical space between them was greater, but the rules were, in their own way, just as complex. A hand brushed against another. A hand brushed against another. These small gestures became the new currency of intimacy. The parlor sofa, with its potential for both closeness and respectable distance, became the new arena for testing boundaries. And now, you watch your grandchildren. The world they are growing up in is different yet again. The parlor is still central, but the rules feel looser. Young people gather in groups more often, for picnics and church socials that feel less formal than the ones of your youth. There is more laughter, more easy camaraderie. The courtship process seems less like a series of formal, high-stakes tests and more like a gradual, pleasant friendship that deepens into something more. But it seems less like a stage for a formal ritual and more like just a piece of furniture. This slow evolution from the board to the sofa is the story of how courtship in the Western world was transformed. It's a story of increasing privacy, but also of increasing formality in some ways. The raw, rustic necessity of bundling was replaced by the more mannered, civilized performance of the parlor cool. Historians have charted this transition with great interest. They see it as part of a larger sentimentalization of the family. As life became less about pure survival, the home was reimagined as a sanctuary of emotion and affection, rather than just a unit of production. The parlor was the physical embodiment of this new ideal. It was a space designed for the cultivation of refined feelings. The debate among scholars often touches on the authenticity of these different modes of courtship. Was the connection forged over a bundling board more real than one developed through stilted parlor conversations? Some might argue that bundling, for all its strangeness, forced a level of honesty and vulnerability that the parlor, with its emphasis on performance and good manners, could not match. You had to talk, and talk seriously, because there was nothing else. Others would argue the opposite, that the parlor was a more realistic training ground for marriage. It taught couples how to navigate the social graces, how to interact in a public-facing way, how to build a relationship based on shared values and pleasant companionship, skills essential for running a household and maintaining a family's reputation in the community. You don't know which is more authentic. You only know your own story. Your love for John began in the most unusual of circumstances, in a situation that your grandchildren would find utterly bizarre and probably terrifying. But that strange beginning led to a lifetime of quiet companionship, a love as solid and enduring as the oak board that once separated you. Your daughter's love for her husband began with shy smiles on a parlor sofa. And their love is just as strong, just as true. It seems the setting, in the end, doesn't matter as much as the people. The human heart, you reflect, is a resilient and resourceful thing. It finds ways to connect, whether it's over a plank of wood in a freezing loft or across the stiff cushions of a formal parlor sofa. The stage changes, but the play remains the same. The fire in your hearth is a tame and gentle thing, contained within a neat brick fireplace. It whispers and sighs, a polite echo of the great, roaring, life-giving inferno that dominated the main room of your childhood home. It is winter again. Outside, a soft snow is falling, blanketing a world that would be unrecognizable to your younger self. You sit in a comfortable chair with padded cushions, a thick knitted shawl around your shoulders. Beside you, in a matching chair, sits John. His hair is white as the snow outside, and his hands, gnarled with age and a life of hard work, rest on his knees. You are both quiet, watching the flames, lost in the long shared silence of a lifetime together. Your great-granddaughter, a little girl with bright, curious eyes, comes to lean against your chair. "Grandmere," she says, her voice a sweet pipe. "Tell us the story again. The one about the board." Her older brother groans. "Not that silly story again." But he settles onto the rug by the fire, his chin in his hands, ready to listen all the same. And so, for what feels like the 100th time, you tell the tale. You tell the tale. You speak of a bitter cold night, a handsome young traveler, and a nervous young girl. You describe the great plank of oak, and their eyes go wide as they always do. To them it is a fairy tale. It is a story of the olden days, as impossibly distant and romantic as a story about castles and dragons. They cannot conceive of the cold that made it necessary, or the poverty that made it practical. As you tell the story, you notice something you've noticed before. You are editing it. You don't speak of the deep, gnawing fear you felt, the scratchiness of the wool, the smell of the damp clothes steaming by the fire. You don't describe the sheer, mind-numbing awkwardness of it all. Instead, your story has become softer with each telling, polished by time. You talk of the whispered secrets, the thrill of a shared secret, the thrill of a shared secret, the quiet magic of the night. You realize, become your own historian, and you are creating a myth. You are sanitizing the past, turning the harsh, complicated reality into a charming folk tale for your descendants. This, you suppose, is the final fate of all history. Later generations, like the Victorians who came after your youth, would look back on customs like bundling and either condemn them as immoral or romanticize them as quaint and charming. They stripped the custom of its context, its desperation, its practicality. They turned it into either a cautionary tale or a sweet pastoral scene. And so the great debate over bundling, the one the young historian tried to solve with his notebook, will never truly end. How should it be remembered? As the scandalous practice your Boston aunt decried, as the pragmatic solution your parents understood, as the dangerous temptation the preachers railed against, or as the sweet, romantic fairy tale your great-grandchildren now hear. The truth is that it was all of those things at once. It was a single, complex knot of honor, practicality, desire, risk, and community, a knot that can never be fully untied. The fire sinks lower and the children's eyes are heavy with sleep. You finish your story. John reaches out and takes your hand. His skin is thin and dry, but his grip is familiar and firm. You look at him, and in his faded eyes, you see the young man who knocked on your door on a long-forgotten winter's night. The world can have its books, its sermons, and its fireside stories. They can abate and analyze and romanticize as they wish. But the real story, the one that matters, is the one that exists in the space between the two of you. A story that began with a plank of cold, hard oak, and ends here in the warmth of a shared lifetime. The fading light of the fire is enough. And now the fire in the story begins to fade to soft, glowing embers. The figures of the old man and woman, sitting in their chairs, grow indistinct, their edges blurring and softening as if they were figures in a dream you are only just beginning to have. The sound of the winter window grows quieter and quieter until it is only the sound of your own soft breathing in the stillness of your room. The story is over. It has done its work. It has carried you from the day that was, across a bridge of words, to this quiet, peaceful place on the very edge of sleep. There is nothing left to do now, nothing to hold on to. You can let the last words drift away like single snowflakes melting into the darkness. Let the images dissolve. Let the thoughts become soft clouds, passing by without any need for your attention. There is only this comfortable weight, this pleasant heaviness in your limbs, a feeling of the deep, soft mattress of your own quiet rest. The tale has been told, and now there is only silence, a warm, welcoming, and peaceful silence all for you. The final word has been whispered. If your mind is still gently stirring, you're welcome to drift into another of my stories. If not, I wish you a deep and peaceful slumber. Good night.